Hi, everyone. We're just waiting for a couple more people to come in, and we're going to get started with our Hot 10 fire prevention safety tips today. All right, everyone, we're going to get started. So let's welcome everyone back, and thank you for joining CCI Huronia today for our March Lunch and Learn webinar entitled Hot 10 Fire Prevention Tips for Your Condo. I'm Sonia Hodis, one of the many directors at CCI Huronia. I'm also a condo lawyer and your moderator today. During the last year, we've been seeing a rise in fires, a rise in insurance claims related to fires. We've also been seeing an increase in inspections and fines related to fire and fire safety. More people are staying home because of the pandemic. More people are cooking at home, and the fire departments are doing more inspections than ever. Fire safety is never boring. As one of our panelists told me during our preparation, it can kill you or keep you alive. So have no fear. We have a great session today, and we've got a great panel. I'm going to call them a smoking hot panel of speakers today. We've got Michelle Farley of FCS Fire Consulting Services, Carrie Clark, who is the Deputy Chief and Manager of Communications, Public Education, and Fire Prevention for the City of Barrie and Emergency Services, Jeff Struing, who's a Property Manager and VP of Shore to Slope. He's also our Vice President for CCI Huronia. And last but certainly not least, we're so happy that Murray Johnson's come back to join us today for another webinar. Murray is the Vice President of Client Operations at Crossbridge Condominium Services Limited and the current President of CCI Toronto. So thank you all for joining us today. Information about the speakers and their contact information will be posted in the chat box shortly, so that if you want to get in contact with any of them, you'll have their contact information. So collectively, all of our speakers are going to bring you their top 10 fire prevention tips so that we can all stay alive and fire-free. But before we get started with those tips, I do want to take the time to thank our sponsors. And without these sponsors, as always, we're not able to put these webinars and make them available to you and to those who watch our webinars after the fact free of charge. So thank you to our sponsors today. We have Integrity Property Management, FCS Fire Consulting Services, Bayshore Property Management, and Macintosh Perry. So thanks again to our sponsors, and I hope all of you reach out to them at some point in the future and give them a thanks. And if you have any questions about sponsors, you can always link to their websites by going onto our website when we post the video, and there'll be a direct link to their website there. All right, so who is the Canadian Condominium Institute? We are an independent nonprofit organization that was formed in 1982. We have chapters from across the country, and in Ontario, we have 8 alone. CCI Huronia is one of those chapters, and we are the current winner of the Lorne Young Chapter of the Year Award for Tier 1. We are also the winner for the Newsletter of the Year Award. CCI's main objective is education, although we also advocate for condos, and we represent all those involved in condos, from owners to directors to professionals, and we encourage all these stakeholders to work together. If you want to experience the benefits of membership of CCI and you're not currently a member of CCI, check out one of your local chapters and consider joining today. If you would like to join the Huronia chapter, you can just go onto our website, ccihuronia.com, and join online. If you'd like to find a chapter near you, you can go to the national website, cci.ca, and click on the chapters tab and then chapter locations. CCI National also has a resource center with a great deal of material available for review relating to condo-related issues. You can access that website and the National Resource Center on the cci.ca national website, or if you just go to our website, ccihuronia.com, you can link to the resource center from there. It's a great resource, and it's a collection of information from across the country, from our various chapters coast to coast. Also, please don't forget to follow and like CCI Huronia on Facebook, and that's a great place to find out about our upcoming events. You can also check out our website for upcoming events, ccihuronia.com. And we just released our second edition of our new newsletter, Condo Buzz, yesterday, and that is available on our website. If you'd like to join our mailing list to be able to get notice of when the newsletters have been posted, you can always send an email to admin@ccihuronia.com and ask to be added to our mailing list. If you've missed any of our previous webinars, recordings of the past webinars can be found on our website under the Resource Content tab. And this webinar today is also being recorded and will be posted on the website next week if you'd like to review it again, or if you'd like to share it with someone who missed today's webinar. So a couple of our reminders: please keep your phones muted and your cameras off. We are recording this session, so we would like to try and get the best recording available. If you're having any trouble with the connection, just end the meeting and log in again. And as a last resort, you can always log in by phone. All of the login details are found on the email confirmation you received. We will be taking live questions for our panel at the end of the webinar. However, as always, during the webinar, feel free to put questions into the chat box. Our panelists will try and answer them as we go along. And then if there's some live questions you'd like to ask, save those to the end, and we'll try and get to as many of those as we can. If you're dialed in by phone, when we get to the live question and answer period, all you need to do is press *9. That will indicate to me that you've raised your hand, and then I can unmute you. If you have logged in by some other method, there is a raise hand button if you open the participant box, and that will allow me to see that you want to ask a question, and I'll unmute you at that time. And finally, our typical disclaimer for all of our webinars: the information you are being provided today is general information. It may not apply to your specific fact situation. If you are a condo director and you want to use the protection of Section 37 of the Act, you need to get an opinion about your specific fact situation from your own professionals. This webinar is not intended to provide you with opinions that would protect you under Section 37. In addition, the information provided today is current as of March 26, 2021, and as things are changing rapidly, the information provided today may not be relevant or applicable at a future date. Also, please be advised that all references to the Condo Act or other legislation is reference to Ontario legislation. So without further ado, I know our panel is ready to get going and deliver their top 10 fire prevention tips for condos. So let's get started. And Jeff, you're going to start us off with our first tip about education, the how, when, and why.
Right, thank you. So with most types of condominiums, and there are various types: townhouse style, low rise, high rise. There's going to be a varying degree of what's required. A reputable fire code consultant can save you money in the long run and make sure that you're in compliance. Avoiding significant fines for non-compliance is one thing, but with building codes and fire codes changing and evolving over the years, there can be changes that impact a building. Sometimes it might only impact a high-rise type building. Sometimes it might impact a different type of building. Some changes are grandfathered, but some are not, and a code consultant will help guide you through the changes and impacts on each of the types of buildings and each of your sites. In some cases, there may be pressure from municipal authorities like building inspector, fire prevention officer, or the like to add or upgrade life safety components due to changes in codes. Sometimes they're required, but sometimes they're grandfathered and should be reviewed with the consultant and the board to determine if there is benefit to implement such changes. I'll hand it over to Murray.
Thanks, Jeff. You know, one issue that exposes a lot of condominiums and condominium managers is the procrastination and sometimes the outright refusal to incur the cost of a professional to assist in being fire code compliant. Let me start with one of my favorite quotes. The only thing more expensive than a professional is an amateur. Think of all the fixing you have to do when the amateur does something for you. And considering that fire code compliance is about life safety, why would a manager or a board remain non-compliant while the issue of becoming compliant through the assistance of a professional is being debated? It's beyond me why you would want to sit there with that liability. The fire code is far too complex to rely on non-professionals. I'd even go as far as saying this, and some people may or may not agree with me. While your fire inspection company, the ones that do the monthly and the annual inspections for your site, are good at what they do, that doesn't make them expert in all facets of what's required in a high-rise building. And I'm speaking primarily to high-rise. That's where my experience is. If you're not looking to a fire code consultant to ensure you remain compliant, then you're exposing yourself to personal liability. Now remember that for directors, director and officers liability insurance covers directors when they act on the advice of a professional, even if at a later date that advice proves to be wrong. So probably the least expensive thing is to hire a fire code consultant. Sonia?
Thanks, Murray and Jeff. And I guess, for our tip number one, when it comes to education, we're not the experts. So in terms of educating ourselves as property managers or as directors, and then educating owners on their responsibilities, when it comes to the how, when, and who, you really do need to look to your professionals to start that education process. So moving on to tip number two, we have Michelle Farley. And Michelle, what's your tip about suites? You get questions about suites all the time. So your tip for suites.
It's one of the biggest confusion points because a lot of people have no idea what's in their suite, whether it's their responsibility or not. And when we do audits, we can ask 3 different people in the same building or the same townhouse complex and get 3 different answers. So simply put, in suite is your life safety equipment and the fire safety equipment that's physically in your suite or your unit. So it may include smoke alarms, CO detectors, door closers, audible fire devices, emergency voice communication, fire doors, heat detectors, and even sprinklers these days. But in-suite life safety equipment will vary drastically, as Jeff pointed out, depending on the type of the condo that you have. So you can have a townhouse condo that may not have any equipment other than their smoke alarm and CO detector, low rises or high rises, and it also depends on the age of your condo. If it's new, it's going to have a lot more state-of-the-art equipment than a condo you would buy that might be 40 years old. So for example, a townhouse often only has a smoke alarm and CO detector, which is 100% the responsibility of that unit owner. Or a high-rise unit might have some or all of the different types of equipment I just listed above. Whether you're a resident, a property manager, or a board member, it's important to know what type of life safety equipment is required by the Ontario Fire Code in your suites and units, and whose responsibility it is to check and test it. How is it to be checked and tested? How often is it required to be checked? And what should you do if it's not working? So residents often say, my smoke alarm's been beeping for months, but they haven't told anybody. This will again vary depending on the type of units in your condo. It's also important to note that the in-suite devices required by law are the minimum standard. You may also want to recommend residents that they consider an additional life safety equipment such as a fire extinguisher in their unit for their own safety and protection. Don't forget to communicate, communicate, communicate. You hear this all the time from me. The biggest thing I hear is people not knowing what's in their unit. Make sure you provide your residents with a list of what's in their suites, either in your rules, regulations, declaration, or their welcome package. Where are they going to see it and read it and know? Be clear about their fire safety requirements and what they are. Remind your residents that at least annually of their fire safety requirements, regular communications with your AGM package, whatever works best for your communication styles in your condo. The bottom line is, properly maintained and working in-suite devices save lives. It's important to know what they are, how they work, and who is responsible to maintain them. I know this seems like a lot of information, but don't worry, we'll be going into more details on these points with the tips to follow. Thank you, Sonia.
Thanks, Michelle. So tip number 2 is know what's in your suite and communicate that with your residents so they know what's in your suite. All right, so moving on to tip number 3. We're very lucky to have Carrie Clark back with us. She's done some other sessions with us when we were doing in-person seminars and our director's course. So Carrie, thanks for coming back. And you've got tip number 3. And this is really a tip about the do's and don'ts. So Carrie, take it away.
Thanks, Sonia. So when it comes to do's and don'ts, the first thing I want you to do is know your building and know your people in your building. Also, number 1, fire safety plan. Know it, start there, improve it. When something comes up, put a note in it, write on your copy, write all over it, add appendixes, review it annually, even more often. Send it to your fire department for approval when you do make changes after your annual review and when everybody's okay with it. And check with your fire department to see if they want only the specific changes or if they want the whole document again. Get a fire safety professional to help you with your fire safety plan. And I can guarantee you that there is nothing better in the world than having a person who knows their building inside and out to help craft the fire safety plan for your fire safety professional. Keys. We got to know about keys. Do you have a fire department lockbox? Are the keys in it current? Are there enough to effectively deal with the building? If there's only one master key and you have 100 suites in your building, it's probably not enough if you need to do a search. And I can tell you a master key is a lot cheaper to cut than probably 50 fire doors that we're going to tactically demolish when we go in to do our checks. Utilities. Do you know how to shut them off? Is it by the floor, by the suite, by the entire building? Are there any access issues to getting to those utilities? If there's a little sign somewhere, it's a lot easier than saying, I think it's behind the 3rd tile in the ceiling on the 5th floor, maybe the 4th floor. That's going to take a lot of time and effort. So know where your utilities are, sign them up. Do you have a generator? Do you know how it runs? Do you know how to check it? Do you know what it does run in the building? We're going to ask you these questions, so it's super handy if you know it already. Did you upgrade your elevators lately? There's been a lot of elevator upgrades happening. And do they still operate like your fire safety plan says they do? The TSSA and the fire code have different standards. So if your fire alarm panel used to run your elevator, does it still? Should it be upgraded? Do you need a new fire alarm panel to do that? Do you know how to run your fire alarm? Your panel is a scary thing to some people. If you're new, get a professional to teach you. If it's a new building to you, get a fire professional to teach you. Is the current graphic beside the annunciator panel actually accurate to the fire alarm system that you have? Because if a firefighter is going to look in zone A and it's not there, it's going to be a problem. Do they know which stairwell A and C are? Are the stairwells actually labeled? Does it control more than one building in your fire alarm panel? If you have multiple towers in a unit, your fire alarm panel may show different things. And is it labeled accurately? Do you know if your panel needs to be replaced? That's always a tricky question. We get a lot of emergency fire alarm panel permits because it was replaced like 6 months ago, but nobody told anybody. And we don't know if the panel actually operates the way that we think that it should or the way that it did before. Make sure you have a Schedule C, and your Fire Alarm Pro can tell you how to do that, of your current panel before you have to change it out, so that it's the owner's manual of how that panel is supposed to operate and what it does. Do you know how to check your sprinkler system, what to look for, make sure they don't freeze? Those systems age out as well, and dry system pipes corrode and need replacing. So make sure that you have in your budget early on capital plans and capital money to replace the sprinkler dry systems and the fire alarm panels. Make sure that all the spare parts in the box have an inventory list, because people use stuff out of that box and it doesn't get replaced. And that box is pretty important. So make sure you have that list and make sure you know what everybody's taking in and out of it. Do you know if your fire alarm panel changes your HVAC system? Does it shut it down? Does it operate it differently? Does it become part of the smoke control system? Do you know how to restart it after a fire event? These are all things you should probably make sure you know, and it's in your fire safety plan, or at least an appendix to it. My personal favorite, doors. Suite doors, stairwell doors, garbage room doors, garbage chute doors, exit doors. They all need to close and latch, every single one, every day. And it's the biggest headache to most property managers that I know. And it's the easiest thing for me to find and write up. So doors, make sure your doors work. Make sure the closers work. Make sure people don't screw with the doors. Decorations on the outside of the doors in the corridor. Biggest no-no ever. More fire deaths have occurred in corridors due to the flammable decorations than any people staying in their suites. The door's fire rating is ruined when you attach things to it. The inside of the suite is yours. The corridor is mine. No decorations in the corridor. And that includes mats, shoes, scooters, extension cords, all are a hard no. The corridor is mine. The stair landing is mine. The vestibule is mine. Those are all fire code. It's not an option. And last but not least, smoke and CO alarms. What kind are in your building? Are they hardwired? Are they battery backed up? Are they isolate? Do they have the 10-year battery? Or are they just replaceable batteries? Combos, standalone units, who's responsible for them? Who has to change them? We're going to talk about that later. But let me tell you, if you have a couple spares, oh yeah, the ones with the strobes too. If you have a couple spares in your back pocket, workbench, or box that you keep in that secret closet, make sure you have a few, because they only beep at 3 a.m. on long weekends and during power events. Other than that, know your people. Make sure you know that those people who are aging in their suites change their fire exit planning before the fire happens. But we'll talk about that too. Over to you, Sonia.
Thanks, Carrie. Now that was a really long list of do's and don'ts. So if you didn't get them all down, don't worry. This is being recorded. You can watch it again and write them down on your second viewing. But I think at the end of the day, tip number 3 in terms of do's and don'ts is do plan ahead and don't try and figure this all out when the fire's happening. All right, so moving on to tip number 4, Carrie, it's back to you. And this is the question about like, who is responsible for all of this? Because we're all kind of shaking in our boots right now, figuring out who's got to take care of this. So can you start us off on that tip?
Sure. So the easy answer is that if the property manager can't tell me the minute that I walk in, I'm just going to charge everybody. I'm going to write an order for the tenant, the unit holder, the property manager, the condo board, and every director. I'll let the justice figure it out, because normally that should be fairly clearly identified already early on. A few years ago, I was inspecting some high rises. I asked for the records ahead of time, like we always do. We ask for 2 years worth of records. I didn't receive them, and I rarely do. Sometimes I'm handed a nice little certificate, sometimes the work order, often the invoice. I'm glad that you paid for it, but I really need the records. So when I did get them, finally, after sternly speaking to the contractor, because they hadn't given them up, I was very disturbed to find that 75% of the smoke alarms had failed in these units, and that 80% of those alarms were failing 2 years in a row. Needless to say, I got a little bit hot under the collar, so I went back to that building and checked every one of those 80% failures, and on year number 3, they had still failed. Why had they failed? The tenants, or the unit owners, thought that they were fine because they were checked every year by a professional and no one had said anything. They even had a nice little barcode on them. They were the same barcode number. I asked the property manager and they hadn't gotten the report, so they didn't know that they were faulty either. And they couldn't have reported it to the condo board because they never got the report. So needless to say, I wrote an order that in 7 days, those alarms had to be changed, and 300 alarms got changed in 7 days. That could have been corrected a lot sooner, and those people were unsafe for 3 years. So again, I just charge everybody. Michelle?
Thanks, Carrie. I love following something like that.
Yeah, I just charge you all.
Well, you know what? It's very clear, and that's the whole point of fire safety education. Let's be clear. So at the end of the day, the responsibility of life safety is your own. And one of the things Carrie's pointing out is people point fingers. So there's a certain amount of responsibility that falls to everybody. But in the world of condominium, there's required to be a defined line of responsibility for fire code compliance. This includes the checking and maintenance of life safety systems and fire safety planning. Do you know what the condo corporation is responsible for versus what your contractors are responsible for versus what the owners are responsible for in your building or in your townhouses. Whether you are a resident, a property manager, or a board, you should know this. You should be able to find the information in the fine print of your rules and responsibilities or in your declaration, but let's make it a little clearer. There are three primary areas of fire safety responsibility. What each individual unit owner is responsible for, that could just be smoke alarms and CO detectors in a townhouse, but it could be the fire door, the latch, the closer, and smoke alarms in the suite. What the corporation has care and control over and is responsible for, and what responsibility is downloaded to the contractors for inspecting, testing, and maintaining your life safety systems. In principle, this seems easily defined. In reality, implementation is not always as clear, and in some cases, there may be shared responsibility. So here's some examples. My first example is the condo corporation may be responsible to check the smoke alarms in the suites annually. However, if that smoke alarm beeps due to a low battery after the test, then it may be the unit owner's responsibility to either fix it, depending on what it says in your rules, or to bring it to the attention of your property management so that somebody can come in and fix it for you. But do your owners know that? And with Carrie's example right now, the answer is no.
No.
It is the corporation's responsibility to communicate their individual fire safety responsibilities to your owners and also to any of your owners who have tenants, because they just became a landlord and the rules are even stricter. The second example I want to share with you is a condo checks the suite doors during their annual fire alarm testing often, but the resident takes the door closer off because it's inconvenient.
I can't get out my walker, it hits me.
The corporation's responsible to inspect the suite doors, but the resident is responsible to maintain that door closer because it's in their suite. And if there's a problem, report it to management. Maybe you need a new one. Maybe yours is sticking or it's too slow or too fast. Those things can be repaired. Again, in this case, it's the corporation's responsibility to clearly communicate to residents what the door closer is and why it's there, and that it must be maintained and working order at all times, and that any maintenance issues are to be reported to management. My last point is that as the life safety systems were tested last month, but the records aren't on site when the fire department asks to see them, the contractor is responsible to do the test and to provide the records. But the building staff is also responsible to make sure that they've conducted any repairs, received the reports, and maintained the records properly. The fire code says for a minimum of 2 years under Part 2 of the fire code. That's what Carrie's expecting to see, right, Carrie?
Absolutely, every time.
So ultimately, the responsibility is the corporations to maintain fire code compliance, to have and evaluate their fire code compliance responsibilities, know their responsibilities, and the corporation to train staff, keep a record of that for a minimum of 1 year, on their responsibilities, know what their contractors are responsible for and what they are not. Communicate residents' responsibilities to them clearly and remind them frequently. Thank you.
Thanks, Michelle and Carrie. So I guess for number 4, in terms of what is our tip for who is responsible, is that it's not just one person. It's a shared responsibility across a variety of people who are sort of in contact in the condo itself. And so don't think it's just somebody's responsibility. You can say, oh, they've done it, so I don't have to worry about it. It definitely is a shared responsibility. All right, so somebody put a question in the chat box about whether the items being discussed today are enforceable in Ontario and not just Barrie. Carrie, that's correct, right? And Michelle, we're talking across Ontario today.
Yes, it's a provincial fire code, so it's everywhere in Ontario.
Thanks. All right, so moving on to our tip number 5, and Carrie and Michelle alluded to this quite a bit in their presentation, but I know on my tombstone, it's going to say document, 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 because that's what I say all the time. And Jeff and Murray, you're going to talk to us about tips with respect to record keeping. So Murray, you're going to start us off?
Absolutely. You've heard how many things have to be inspected. And so even if there isn't a formal log, for all of these things you've heard, if it sounds new to you, create a log and put a process in place. So I write my scripts out. At my age, I forget things quickly. So high-rise buildings have very complex systems that both directly and indirectly affect fire code compliance. So you heard quite a comprehensive list from Carrie, but generators, fire pumps, sprinkler systems, smoke control systems, doors, of course, in-suite sensors, training. Some of the softer side is the proper training occurring, not just about the mechanical side of the building. When the fire inspector came in, you heard it from the fire department just a few minutes ago. The inspector wants to see all those records and logs without having to travel all over the building and pick up bits and pieces here and there.
Okay, so
Gonna
you
say,
just have to, why don't you do it at the same time, okay? You weave the lattice together, right?
Sorry, Murray, I'm trying to mute. If everybody could keep their mics muted, please. Oh, just a sec, Murray. You're still muted.
there we
Go ahead.
go. Yes, when that fire inspector requests those records, they want to see them all, and they want to see them quickly and efficiently. And so here's a high-rise tip for you. Gather all of those records, the ones from the generator room, any other area where records are kept. Bring all of those into one central binder, one location where when the inspector asks, you can hand that binder over, and it has everything, even some things that may surprise them. And I'll talk about that in a moment. You can still leave copies in the respective areas if you want, but put them all together in one central location. Do you have door closer logs? Or do you have a process in place to inspect and test all of those doors? Think about it this way. Your cleaners, as part of their regular routine, can check garbage chute doors. They can check stairwell doors and common element doors. Give them a log they can fill out, put in place a process so that you have a record that they did that. Not only will you catch any deficiencies quickly, you're going to be able to demonstrate to the inspector when they come that you have an ongoing process. Your annual inspection reports, and we heard about the repairs not being done for 3 years. What a horror story that is. Put that inspection report in your central binder and put in the proof of repair for all of those deficiencies as well. You create those logs for suite doors and have your HVAC people that come in once a year and your fire inspector that comes in once a year, have them test the door and fill out the log. The test is not complicated. You don't need a university degree. All you have to do is open the door all the way, let it go, and under its own weight, it should close and latch. If it doesn't, then that's a fire deficiency. So show that you have processes in place and that you're acting on those deficiencies as they arise, and all of those records are in one place. Sonia?
Thanks, Murray. Jeff, what do you got to add to this tip about record keeping?
Thanks, Sonia. So I'm going to focus on low-rise and townhouse-style buildings, which are very different from high-rise buildings. Typically, a low-rise townhouse-style building will not have a fire sprinkler system or centralized fire alarm system, and therefore likely don't require an annual fire inspection and the resulting reports. Most townhouse-style condos will be equipped with simple smoke alarms and CO alarms within the units, and in most declarations make those the unit owner responsibility to repair them, maintain them, replace the batteries, and so on. However, many municipal fire departments have begun shifting the responsibility to be more shared, or in some cases completely the responsibility of the condo corporation, even in townhouse style buildings. We are seeing fire departments requiring annual inspections of unit devices, or at least a self-testing declaration by the unit owners that they submit to the property manager, and then copies forwarded to the fire department. That self-declaration is basically inspecting the CO or the smoke device to determine what the expiration date is on, and confirming that the batteries are working, whether they're a long life sealed battery or standard replaceable batteries, and that the unit functions. And therefore, there are records that need to be maintained. Most low-rise townhouse buildings don't have an on-site office or suitable place to store such records. So in that case, the property management office is usually the best choice for those records to be stored, and they should be well organized and readily available for the fire prevention office.
Thanks, Jeff. So in terms of our record keeping tip, it's not just about creating these records, but also having them available when you need them and keeping them organized. So let's move on to our next tip, tip number 6. And we're going to be talking about annual repairs and reports. So Michelle, you're going to start us off.
Okay. Most condominiums conduct their annual life safety system tests with their service companies on time. We rarely see people that haven't done their test. We often see people that don't have the records or can show their repairs. Yet, we still see fire alarm records on many notices of violation. And this is throughout Ontario, not just in the Toronto or Barrie area. This does not necessarily mean that the test wasn't done. It often means that the repairs haven't been done or completed, that there's not a record of the correction of deficiencies, or there's no certificates of completion, or worse, no records at all. Part 2 of the Fire Code requires you to keep all of these records for a minimum of 2 years. It's great that you did your annual life safety system tests, but it is not finished until repairs are completed and signed off on, and you have your records of it. The bottom line is, the test could have been done, you still need the report. Once the tests have been completed, it's important that you receive the deficiency lists on schedule. A great tip from me here is to talk to your contractor when you are hiring them, before you give them your money, and to make sure that timely paperwork management is going to be part of your contract. Once you have received the deficiency list, you now have to facilitate all necessary repairs and corrections promptly and receive and maintain the certificates or close off of any records to confirm that these have been completed. Know what your contractor's responsibilities are during and following your annual life safety system tests, and know what your responsibilities and follow-up actions are. Your annual service inspections may include multiple documents and multiple contractors. Your fire alarm company may not be the company that also tests your private hydrants, your smoke control systems, or your generator. Do your best to streamline your annual inspections to take place around the same time or even the same month. Ask contractors how long your deficiency report and certificates will take and follow up on them if they're not received by that date. We often see good test records, but no repair reports. Or repair reports partially finished with multiple notes for additional work that's required, for access to suites, for example, that were not available during the test or the repair dates. Notes that say no access available, too high to test, unable to access this area during the tests or during the repairs. Notes like that are the ones that are going to get you in trouble. Complete all of these areas. It has to be arranged with your testing and repair company, and complete your documentations. Make sure that they're all finished. It's a very important note there that if you're thinking about delaying or moving forward and not moving forward with your repairs right away because they seem excessive, too expensive, or incredibly repetitive from previous years of testing, don't delay your repairs. Get a professional opinion. The liability is yours until you resolve all outstanding matters of repairs in a report and have your completion documents. We have clients that call often questioning their service provider's reports, asking, is this a recommendation or is it required? Why is it so expensive? Or how come we've done this 3 years in a row? If you're seeing that type of thing, there's always solutions. It may have to be evaluated and the work completed in a different manner to make sure you're not having repetitive problems. But you are absolutely within your rights to question repair quotes when they seem unreasonable. If it looks hinky, it might be, but it doesn't allow you the time to delay. Get on it right away. Don't allow scrutiny of your test results to delay your responsibilities for compliance and possibly end up with violations. Thank you.
Jeff, what can you add to this?
Yeah, thanks, Michelle and Sonia. So the annual fire inspection is important to be scheduled around the same time each year. Most fire prevention officers are pretty aware of when they're taking place, so they'll be following up, looking for a copy of the report. A lot of follow-ups often required with the contractor completing the inspection. It seems they're quick to go on site, complete the inspection, but getting the report on their findings and particularly the deficiencies can sometimes take a long time. Finding the right contractor that can commit to providing the reports quickly is important. Something to consider is authorizing the contractor to complete minor repairs during the inspection. Have a supply of smoke detectors, heat detectors, horns, pull stations, fire extinguishers, any of the other common devices on hand during the inspection, or have the contractor have a supply on hand in their service vehicle, so that if it's a simple, smoke alarm's aged out or has not met the sensitivity requirements, and instead of making a note and sending in a report 3 weeks later and then scheduling a repair a month down the road and maybe having to order parts that can all take time, they can swap it out while they're on site and maintain the safety of the unit or the common element.
Thanks, Jeff. So in terms of tip number 6, testing is only stage 1, but we need to make sure that once that testing is done, we get those reports and that we look at those reports to make sure everything that needs to be done is actually done, and we get a report that says that it's done. So documentation and follow-up is really the key to our tip number 6. All right, moving on to tip number 7, and we're going to start off with Murray, and we're going to talk about beyond the minimum standards. Take it away, Murray.
Yeah, and what I'd like to do is put a little bit of a twist on that and talk about what we do. What do those boots on the ground have to do to go beyond those minimum standards? And so as much as it's about life safety, it's also about the optics and the processes you have in place. So we said it earlier, the creation of any logs, like the door closer logs, making sure that you have those, create them if you don't have them. And putting systems and processes in place if you have to address a notice of violation that ensures not only that you correct the violation, but that you put a process in place that prevents that violation from recurring in the future. So we're not just solving a problem, we're preventing a problem. And if you're wondering how to start with these processes and things like that, if you have a notice of violation, or if the management company, one of the other sites that you have, has a notice of violation, take a look at that, and that'll give you a really good starting point. The key here is to put the process or procedure in place that addresses the issue immediately, and you don't wait for another violation. Now, here's where I'm going to tie in some other things for you. Good managers develop annual plans each year when they're putting their budget together. So all of those unique little steps, we have to do something so we don't forget. Have you put all of your fire-related tasks, inspections, and coordinations and facilitations into your annual plan? And if you have, why not highlight those fire-related ones and put a copy of that fire plan in with your centralized record-keeping system? That way, not only will the inspector see what the logs and the records show, they'll also see how you've planned out your year, which can only make you look better. So does your annual fire plan include checking the fire safety plan and all of those other related items? How about sending, and we heard this before, the assistance required form and the resident emergency responsibility instructions to the residents each year with your AGM or budget package? And is that in your annual plan? And if you do it, make a record of it and put that into your centralized system too. If you do have these extra steps in the operation of the building, I think it's critical, certainly from an optics standpoint, that the inspector can see that you've done and you've taken these extra steps. As much as we want a safe community, we want the fire inspector to understand what extra steps we're taking to ensure code compliance, and that we're really taking it seriously. Sonia?
Thanks, Murray. Carrie?
I wish that Murray was the teacher for all of the buildings in Barrie anyway. But that is a critical piece. If you can do those things, if you can show that you're trying, that you are correcting items that you find that are broken, that if you don't document it, it didn't happen. That's how it, I'm sure Sonia can give me a hands up on that one. But if you really need to try, and you really need to keep showing that you're trying. Once you've identified it, you know it's happening. So if you know it, you have to deal with it. And like I said in my do's and don'ts, things wear out. My stuff wears out. The fire alarm panels wear out. The sprinkler systems wear out. And those aren't cheap, and they're not fast. So when you start to see little failures on your panel, ground circuit faults, those kinds of things, start thinking maybe something's going on here that's independent of a daily event, and start sort of noticing those little things before they become big things. That is when you can start to plan annually and keep your money flowing in a positive cash flow format, as opposed to the emergency repair, which is just a gouge. So anytime an ounce of prevention is better than a pound of cure, that is what we prefer. I know when I write an order, it's just a piece of paper to me, but it's hundreds of thousands of dollars to you. So if you can get ahead of it the first time and you've shown that you're doing it, I'll be a little more lenient, not much, but a little bit on giving you a chance to get that fixed up. Thank you.
Thanks, Carrie. So in terms of, our tip number 7 about going beyond the minimum standards, it's always a good idea to do that little bit extra. It'll help you when the fire department comes calling and starts inspecting, but it also saves you some money in the long run, because sometimes dealing with these things ahead of when you need to is a lot cheaper, as Carrie said, than dealing with them on an emergency basis. So moving on to tip number 8, and Carrie, it's going to come back to you, and tip number 8 deals with access.
Oh, access. So access means two things to me. Access means my people coming in, the big red trucks and all the equipment. And it can also mean, how do we get into someone's suite to fix things, to look at things, and maybe when they don't want us to. So access is two different things. When your building's new and it's great and everybody's happy, you've got all your signage, everything's perfect, then things start to get a little bit tired, a little saggy. The signs start to rust a little bit. The vegetation grows up. I can't find the hydrant. I don't know where the fire department connection is. There's a big tree in front of my access points. The doors somehow got locked that shouldn't be. There's now a fence around the building that wasn't there. So when I come out an exit door, I can't actually get away from the building. Things like that start to be a problem for me, big style, and for anyone who's trying to get in or out of that building. The other thing is trying to get into a suite. When there's a complaint, they're super happy to let you in, right? If there's a leak, if there's a plumbing issue, generally a plumbing issue, they'll let you in a heartbeat. But if it's your annuals and you have your general crusty people, they still have to get in to do those things. And then the people who are collectors are definitely a problem. Depending what they collect is also a big deal. And it impacts not just if it's a multiple unit house, it's not just the unit, but the 5 units around it. So the 4 on all sides and the 1 across the hall. Generally, it comes to us as smells, pests, unknown substances, and then it becomes a project. So those types of accesses are things that Michelle's going to round out in her comments.
Thanks, Carrie. So when might you have to schedule access to units or suites as a property manager or as the board of directors? We talked about the fact that individual townhouse units may not ever require the corporation to go in, or possibly very rarely for things like window replacement, not necessarily fire safety. But in most condos, access is required at a minimum of yearly, with proper inspection of fire safety equipment, fire doors, even fan coil and heating systems, as they are part of the electrical mechanical systems that have to be maintained regularly to prevent hazards as per the fire code, if they're part of the responsibilities of the corporation. There are 2 main types of access. The first is scheduled access. The type of access is when your annual fire alarm test is due, you require access to the suite to check in suite life safety devices. For example, their smoke alarms and their fire alarm and sprinkler or fire doors to make sure the doors close and latch properly. That typically can be scheduled access. When you know you have to go into resident suites, you have the ability to provide ample notice for when you're going to go in and why you have to go in. This type of maintenance is generally scheduled at the time of year with the residents at the same time, so the residents can anticipate it. And sometimes sending a notice in advance saying, next month is April and we're going to be having our annual inspection, and then sending another notice later saying it will be the third week of April on these days, gives people ample notice to prepare. So you require access to the suite to check that life safety system. You want to ensure they have ample notice and they can prepare for that. It also gives you time to see if there's any pushback. So if people say, you can't come in, my dog's going to be there, or I can't be available that day and I won't let you go in if I'm in suite, or these days there's a risk of COVID or something else going on, or a fear of COVID. It gives you time to make adjustments before your very, very expensive contractors come to your site. When you know you have to go into resident suites, you have the ability to provide ample notice and when you're going in and what you're going to be doing, why you have to go in. This type of maintenance is generally scheduled at the same time, and that's what will allow you to have your pre-planning. But the second time of access is what Carrie was just talking about, risk assessments. This can be a little more complicated. Risk assessments may be required when you have a risk in your suite or a concern that's been raised due to a potential fire safety issue or other issues with a particular resident. Suspected hoarding is one of the challenges that we often hear, or improper use of balconies as storage, which may require access to evaluate the scope and the type of the fire safety concern. How do you go about sensitive topics and access of dealing with resident owners or renters? You can be both firm and empathetic. You should give as much notice as options at days and times and access as reasonable and possible, but you should also be clear. Once that date and time window is confirmed, include a statement that arrangements have been made, what the access is for, and that it's essential, that it is imperative access be granted at that time, and what the access is for so that they understand why you're coming in. Hopefully, occupants comply. But if not, you've made your intentions very, very clear, you've made your reasons clear, and you've prepared to go to the next step of achieving that access, even if that happens to be calling your representative like Sonia to say, we're not getting in. There's lots of remedy under the Condo Act to allow your lawyers and your professionals to help you achieve that access. I loved what Jeff said about pre-planning. I hear all the time, we didn't have any trouble getting in on the annual, but boy, it took us 3 tries with our service company to get all of those smoke alarms repaired or all of those in-suite heat detectors replaced that were defective. I ran a fire alarm service company for 14 years. I applaud Jeff for what he just said. I used to pre-approve a small dollar value with the property manager, 300, 600, 900, whatever it was, and keep that with you. So if we can get that pre-approval, it's done while you're in there at the time. Reduce the stress to you, to the resident, and you will save yourself both time and money. Regardless of the reason, when the corporation requires access to the units, you want to give the residents lots of notice, define all the requirements of entry, make it easy for you and the residents to manage, have a procedure for emergency access, and a backup plan for refused access. Proper planning will save you time and money whenever suite access is required. It will also help to keep your residents happy. Thank you.
Thanks, Carrie and Michelle. So in terms of access, I guess our tip is you've got to look at it from a variety of different perspectives. Carrie talked about, the fire department being able to get access. And she told us a great story during our planning session about some condo who had these beautiful shrubs and gardens. But it was, the firemen and women would have to jump over these things to actually gain access to what they needed. So access from the fire department side, you need to plan and think about that ahead of time. But also you need to plan about access into the units for a variety of different reasons. So when it comes to access, think about it from 2 perspectives, but also think about what can you do in terms of the planning stages to make that requirement easier for those that need to get access. All right, so moving on to our number 9 tip. We're going to start off with Carrie, and we're going to talk about fire safety plans and processes and updating. So Carrie, what's our tip in terms of fire safety plans and processes?
I know that you think that the fire code is very complex, and I agree. However, it is also the minimum standard. We're not just making stuff up, it's in the book, which is my Bible, but we'll talk about that later. So when it comes to professional updates, you really need to ensure that all of the systems in your space, whether it be low rise, high rise, or anywhere in between, have all the things that you need on it written down, clearly identified, clearly responsibility beside it so that everyone knows what's going on. If you have a fire safety plan, you need to be at one with it, and you need to have it available for your responding crews. If you have the assistance required sheets as part of that, we just saw it the other day at a fire. People in the building had turned over slowly but conveniently into mostly seniors and people with special needs, wheelchairs, oxygen usage, and the plan hadn't been updated. So it turned out that 50 out of 75 of the units needed assistance in evacuating during an actual fire event. That's pretty significant, resource heavy for a fire department to actualize. So all of the things that are in your building, the know your building, know your people thing, is how you can update your fire safety plans and make sure that they're current and accurate, and that you have your professionals write it to make sure that everyone knows the real deal. Jeff?
Yeah, so fire safety plans for buildings that actually require one should initially be completed with a reputable code consultant that specializes in fire safety plans and the equipment within the building. Sometimes they need to be replaced or majorly updated if systems in the building are upgraded or renovations in the building take place that might change the layouts of certain floors and or the use of certain rooms within the building. They can be very complex in larger buildings, especially resort style buildings. The fire safety plan needs to be reviewed and updated at least annually. If you know that there's a major change, don't wait for the annual review, do it sooner. With possible changes to fire code or building demographics, a code consultant is valuable to ensure everything is up to date. If the building has a superintendent, they can provide valuable information, especially with the resident assistance requirements in the building. If there's not a superintendent, hopefully resident board members can aid in determining which residents require assistance, so that portion of the plan can be updated accordingly. Simple things like changing contact information and so on can typically be completed by the property manager, but anything that's more complex, especially systems related, building layout related, or usage, it's best to consult with an expert.
Thanks, Jeff. Murray?
Yeah, well, we've heard it over and over and over again. You know, have a professional come in, have an expert look after it. The systems in a high-rise building are just simply too complicated for a manager to address all of the various aspects of fire code compliance that need to be in a fire safety plan. I was actually at a board meeting one time where one of the directors said, well, I think if I read the plan and I just sort of follow the context, I can update it myself. And I said to the director, I said, that's fantastic. And if you miss something because you don't have directors and officers liability protecting you, you didn't act on the advice of a professional, I just have one question, and that's, why do you want to assume that responsibility? You don't need to. We know that directors and managers are not fire code experts. You've got to have that professional come in. That fire safety consultant looks at the plan, looks at the building, and bridges the gap. What's the delta between the two? They audit the building, the processes, the training, the staff. They identify all of the training that needs to be done. when an inspector comes into that building and asks, or during an emergency, the fire department walks in there and asks a question of what a person's supposed to do, they should be able to answer that right away. So it's not just updating the fire safety plan. You've got to have a process in place where staff, and staff often rotates, occasionally management companies rotate. You've got to have some training, formalized professional training on what's in that fire safety plan. I keep thinking that the cost of a single violation to a condominium that might be fined is going to be far greater than the cost of having that professional come in and make sure that you're compliant. So update the fire safety plan using a professional. I would say have it reviewed annually, maybe enter into a contract, and that contract will roll over, not just updating the plan, but doing the training and reviewing the building. There's so much in there that, I mean, I deal with this almost every day, and I almost know 3% of it. So avoid the liability, hire the professional, save lives.
Thanks, Murray. And I don't think I can sum it up any better than that. Professional plans, training, and all of us can be around for our next webinar. Exactly. All right, so moving on to our top 10. We're at number 10 now. So Murray, you're going to start us off because we're going to talk about our top 10. Number 10 tip is communication.
Communication. That's my wife always tells me, communicate, communicate, communicate. So fire code compliance wouldn't be complete without proper communication. And I'm talking about communication to condominium staff, whether they're contracted or direct hire staff. And certainly the management team needs to understand that too. Communication to the fire code inspector, communication to the fire department if they're on site. And all those extra efforts we talked about earlier, there's some communication that can happen during an inspection. Communication to residents, I think, is critical. You don't know what you don't know, and we've got to give them more information. So that can be done through the annual distribution of the resident emergency responsibility instructions, the assistance required forms. And I'd go a little further and say, if you've got nothing to put on the bulletin board, do an educational campaign. Let them know about all of the things in their unit that they may be responsible for. And Carrie did a very good summary of all of that earlier. So take 3 or 4 of those, put them in a notice, and those notices can go up every time there's a space. Here's one for you. I think that the board and management should outline fire safety policies addressing how to respond to annual deficiency lists, how to address emergencies, and give the manager direction with a definition of what can be done without going back to the board to request permission. You know, most management contracts have a clause in there that deals with emergencies. And I would say that the failure of life safety is definitely top of the list for an emergency. So create this policy, and a policy like that could be communicated to your owners as well, because I think that sort of policy illustrates the depth of preparedness that a corporation has. And maybe owners might want to send a copy of that to their insurer. That may have some benefits for them. We often see that staff, and that may be the cleaners, again, contracted or direct hire, supers and security. If a fire inspector or the fire department comes in and asks them a question, the typical answer is, not sure. And so what does that reflect for the building? It means that that's a high-risk building. It means that if you're an inspector or you're there on an emergency call, you've got to dig a lot deeper. And I'm going to tell you, it doesn't matter how good you are. You dig deep enough, there's going to be a lot of problems there. So we've got to have really good communication to our staff. So I'm going to suggest to you that the manager should be having regular staff meetings, and I mean regular, maybe 12 or 13 a year. And part of the agenda should include, for sure, fire compliance discussions. It's got to be second nature. Police train, firemen train all the time so that when the emergency happens and the adrenaline is pumping, that training kicks in naturally, instinctively. And so the staff should be the same way. They should know when that alarm goes off, instinctively, what do they have to do. And so that can only happen by reinforcing the training on a regular basis. And one more for you, for those managers out there. Why not have an ongoing section in your management report that discusses and addresses fire code compliance? And that way, you're keeping your directors abreast of what's going on, and you're keeping fire code compliance and fire safety front and center for them as well. Sonia?
Thanks, Murray. Carrie, what are your thoughts on communication?
Love communication. I'm a manager of communications. So the other thing about buildings is label things. Label the stairwells, label the doors, label what you want people to do. Put label. It can be nice and appropriate labeling that matches your decor. But I can tell you that when there is an actual fire emergency, people are looking for direction. They may have gotten the letter, they've gotten the idea, but they're like, oh, am I supposed to use the elevator or not? Nobody wants to pull a pull station. 0 people. My dispatchers have to beg people to pull pull stations in the hallways. So, and sometimes your buildings, depending on their age, they don't have monitoring. So they pulled the pull station to alert the people in the building, but no one's calling 911. So that's great. People know that there's a problem, but no, the fire department doesn't know. So make sure if your building has that type of situation going on, that they know that they have to call us. If there is, we tell people to use the A stairwell when we use a voice communication, or don't use the C stairwell because we're going to contaminate it. But if your stairwells aren't labeled, nobody knows which one's A and which one's C. I have seen in a few places, they have created their list of in-suite responsibilities, in-suite items that the fire department would care about, and put it in the plastic pocket in the electrical panel in the suite. The fire department, when they go to your suite, is probably going to isolate the power to whatever, your stove, your fridge. It's usually cooking. Cooking's the #1 cause of problems. So they go to the electrical panel to isolate it, and in there is a little list of things that they also should know about in that suite, or where things are, what else that circuit might handle, or things like that. So if you need a place in your condo that people will go to, see if you can put a little plastic pocket, only 1 sheet of paper. Don't put a lot of stuff in your electrical panel, but that's always a good place that everybody goes to. Communication with the people in your building to know what to do. If you are in a high rise, then you may be able to shelter in place, which is great. If you're not, if it's 7 stories or below, we need you to get out. We need you out of the building. The safest place is out of the building. So if you can do it safely, if you can stay out of the smoke, you need to have a plan that if you usually use the elevator and you can't, what are you going to do? If you're on the 5th floor of a 5-story building, how are you going to isolate? If the fire's in your unit, where are you going to go? And if the fire is in an adjacent unit, what's going to happen? And if it's on a different floor, what's going to happen? So we always like you out front so we can see you, especially in low rises and townhouses, because when one townhouse goes, they are still connected. So we don't have 1 problem, we have 3 until we can get the fire extinguished. So when you have those kinds of places, we need to ensure that everybody knows to get out, stay out, and communicate with people on scene that you're out and which unit you're in.
Thanks, Carrie. Jeff?
Yeah, so low-rise buildings, townhouses are quite a bit different. They don't have centralized bulletin boards or PA systems within the building, or monitors in their elevators for the residents to hear all these great tips and things to do in the case of an emergency, and what to do as far as their responsibilities are. So often newsletters or a homeowner communication from the board or property management with reminders to check their batteries and test devices. If the fire department's providing a self-testing declaration, include that with the communication out to the homeowners. Typically it's twice a year, spring and fall. Set the clocks forward and back. Eventually that's going to disappear, so still keep it twice a year. Seasonal reminders: don't leave lit candles unattended or pots on the stove unattended. Winter months, space heaters unattended is a common issue. These are perfect things to have in the newsletter. Have a nice box or something to draw attention around it. Make sure if the homeowner is responsible for maintenance and repairs of the HVAC equipment, that they're having routine maintenance done on their furnace to make sure it's not full of dust and so forth. And don't forget Christmas tree safety. Live trees, especially in condominiums, can dry out pretty quick. So make sure they're kept nice and watered. Some condo corporations actually pass a bylaw or a rule that live trees are prohibited because of the issues that they can cause.
Thanks, Jeff. So, between Carrie, Jeff, and Murray, I think one of the things that we take away with our top 10 number tip is that communication isn't a two-way street. It's a multi-way street. And you're communicating in a bunch of different directions. And there's a lot of communication that's cross-communication that has to happen regularly. So that's our number 10 tip: is communication is more than a two-way street. All right, so before we get into our bonus tip, each of our panel members have a bonus tip for us. But before we get into that, I just want to remind everybody that we are going to go into a live question and answer after this bonus tip. So if you want to start lining up for your questions, get your hands raised. If you're on your phone, press *9, and we'll start taking those live questions after we go through our bonus tip from each of our panel members. So Murray, I'm going to start with you. What is your bonus tip?
Well, I want to reiterate something I already said, and that's about centralizing all of the fire compliance records and logs and logs you may have designed. It occurs to me that just in the past week, two influencers are affecting what we're talking about today. Certainly COVID-19, people being home a lot more than they were, a lot more working fires in kitchens, way up 30, 40, 50%, I'm sure. And the other one is I've seen 3 news stories about some pretty drastic fires, one in a high-rise, one in a townhouse, and one in a detached home, with a loss of 4 lives. So I think we would all be remiss if we didn't expect that inspectors are going to be pushing for lots of things right now in view of that. So get those records into one place, develop that fire code policy, put that in there. The goal is to show that you've got the processes and the triggers to ensure that you're addressing violations in a timely manner. You might say that you're proving that you have a best practice community.
Thanks, Murray. Jeff, what's your last tip that you want to leave us with?
Well, it's normally still snowy out at this time of year, but the mild weather's taken the snow away. But it's very important to be mindful of snow and clearing it away from emergency exit doors from the building, keeping vents, gas meters clear and free of snow or falling ice from above.
Thanks, Jeff. And Michelle, what are you leaving us with?
Well, I want to leave you with what Murray just referred to. There's been some pretty substantial fires in the last 10 days. There's early reports of lack of smoke alarms, potentially a hoarding issue. There was definitely reports of stairwell doors not latching, causing smoke to spread, and that the elevator key did not allow the fire department to use the elevator when the stairs became compromised for evacuation. So everything we're saying today is important, but when we discussed all these things, the one thing that came up several times and comes up with a lot of condos was fobs and doors and mag locks. So I'm just going to take a minute and touch on that topic because we get that call all the time. It's a great bonus tip, because the misinterpretation of what a condo can and can't do with their fire doors. A fob is a security or resident access control typically seen on lobby doors or access to amenities. A magnetic locking device or mag lock is a complex locking mechanism that either holds the door open or closed, but it opens or closes on the event of a fire emergency as well, so it's a fail-safe application. The main difference is that mag lock doors must follow the rules of the building and the fire code. It must be fail-safe, connected to the fire alarm, open or close on alarm, fire alarm trouble, or power failure. It's a different type of a piece of equipment than just opening and closing the front door with your fob. The basic rules for mag-lock doors are simple. If it's an exit, you can't lock it. If it's a fire door in a corridor, you can't prop it open. So why do we see locked and propped doors all the time? There's lots of reasons. Primarily convenience, or population of aging people in the building, difficulty open doors, so people prop them open, even for ventilation. We see people keeping them open for various reasons, just to get better airflow, even their own suite doors, which is not allowed. We also see this for security. It's a lot of reasons. Sometimes there's theft in an underground garage. Sometimes there's vagrant traffic coming into the building, so people have to lock doors. There's a lot of reasons, but the good news is there are a lot of solutions. You can mechanically prop fire doors, and you can lock exit doors if it's done properly and identified as something that can be done at that location in that building and still meet the building and the fire code requirements. Just propping a hallway fire door open violates the fire code. However, if you arrange for a qualified consultant and or contractor to do the proper specifications and permits, you may be able to provide a fail-safe magnetic locking device at that location. The same with locking doors. There's proper processes, professionally evaluate where it is in a means of egress, is it allowed, how can we do it fire code compliant. So a locksmith or fob contractor may not be the right professional to lock or put a hold open device on an exit door. Qualified consultants or qualified contractors evaluate and look at other solutions for keeping your building safe and handling your problem. Let's find the solution to your problem. There's a variety of ways to do it. And the last thing I just want to leave you with is the fact that Murray made a great recommendation to make sure you review your fire safety plan and all your records annually. Well, I have good news that Carrie's going to like. It's the law. Part 1 of the Ontario Fire Code says, thou shalt review your fire safety plan annually. Whether you do it yourself, have your engineers, your consultants do it, it has to be reviewed annually, and you have to have a record of doing that. So please, everybody can go home now, look at those records and see when the last time they were upgraded, and if there's a record of that, and that will make Carrie very, very happy. Thank you.
And Carrie, what's your last tip that you're going to leave us with?
My last tip is prevent, detect, escape. Keep the combustibles away from the hot things. Everywhere in your suite and everywhere in your building. Make sure you have working smoke and carbon monoxide alarms that are less than 10 years old, and have an escape plan. No matter how you have to escape, if it has to be sitting on your bum going down the stairs, good with it, but get out of the building. Have a plan, practice the plan, and we'll see you on the outside.
Thank you, everyone, for those great tips. So we're going to open the floor up to questions. So if you want to ask a question, get your hand up and we'll unmute you. While we're waiting for people to put their hands up, there are a couple questions in the chat box that I'm going to throw out to the panel. So any of the panel members, feel free to jump in. One question was, I'm new on the board of directors for a townhouse complex. Is our management company responsible to tell us about everything we talked about today? Who wants to start off on that one?
I'll jump in there.
Go for it, Maury.
I think that the management company, the manager, is responsible to get that information to the residents. I'm not completely convinced that the manager should be the one who authors that information. I think that information should be part of a site review from a consultant. So they look at that, where are your high risks? This is what you need to do. This is what you need to convey. And then the manager makes that happen.
Jeff, anything to add?
I agree with Murray. Hire the expert. Let them take the liability. The property manager's not going to want to take undue liability. And the board shares in some responsibility as well, knowing about their building, and if they need to obtain information from the manager, and hopefully the manager can provide it. But it may also require bringing in a fire safety contractor or code consultant, depending on the complexity of the building. There may be the need for more than one professional. Sprinkler systems are very different than fire alarm systems, and different contractors may be required for both to educate everyone on that, especially when it's a new building, either to the management firm or a new building to the board member. It doesn't hurt to bring in the contractor. Most contractors won't charge to come in and refresh people on their systems. So,
Michelle or Carrie, do you have anything to add to that question?
Yeah, I'd like to also add the fact that some condominiums are very small, self-managed. They may not have a lot of availability for somebody to get that information right away. If you move into a condo, a townhouse, low-rise, high-rise, you can obtain that fire information generally yourself by going on your local fire department website. There's all kinds of resources. There's a plan your escape. There's what to do with your smoke alarm and CO detectors. There's also bylaws in different municipalities that one municipality may mandate CO detectors in all buildings, where in Northern Ontario, there's still some places where those bylaws haven't been passed. And if the building's old, you might not have one and need one. So the life safety responsibility is ours. You want to make sure you're safe as well. Yes, it's the board. Yes, it's management. But the day you move into your condo, your property manager is not standing on your porch helping you with your boxes. So make sure you look at your local municipal fire department's website, see what you can learn yourself, and then ask those appropriate questions.
Carrie?
I think the first 5 minutes of an event dictate the next 5 hours or sometimes 5 months of your life. So if you can have a plan in place to get out of your unit or get into a safe space within the first 5 minutes, you'll be doing good. But that's up to you. No one else can make you do it. We mandate fire drills in everything from kindergarten, from daycare to kindergarten to workplaces, but we can't mandate it where you live. We can make the building do one, but we can't make you do one. So you have to put on your big person pants and figure out how to get out of your unit and outside. That's your job.
And it comes back again to one of our tips, right? This is a shared responsibility. It's not, you can't just point fingers at one.
No.
There was a couple of questions in the chat, and I know, Carrie, you answered some of them, but I'm not sure if everybody's following, and I think it was a good question. With respect to inspections and COVID and accessing units and doing them over Zoom, and can you give everybody a sort of a little bit of background in terms of where things stand right now and what's happening with inspections?
I can only speak to Barry. Our corporation has said that we are, for building code inspections on new buildings that are not occupied, we as inspectors can be in there with one contractor following all the guidelines, masks, distancing, all that stuff. For occupied spaces that are not immediate threat to life, we are virtually inspecting them. So until we are in a place where more people are vaccinated, there's more opportunity to keep our members safe. We're virtually inspecting, which is harder than you think. You have to train someone how to hold their phone so that when you say, look to the left or look to the right, we're all going the same direction. There's motion sickness issues because people move too fast. And it's super hard to do inspections over Zoom. But the person in the space can push the buttons, hear the alarms. The inspectors that are coming from your, if it's an immediate threat to life, we have to air pack up, do all of the stuff to keep us safe to be in that space. The inspectors that are coming from the companies, originally, they're still mandated by the health units on what they can and can't do. So they're following the health unit recommendations in the areas that their inspections are in. There was a lockdown right at the start, but I think people got their information figured out. Murray, do you have more on that?
Yeah, one comment. You just touched on it. At the beginning of the pandemic, of course, everything was shut down, and that included in-suite. And that was probably, from a pandemic point of view, a very good decision. And so for some reason, the annuals were put off. An annual can still happen, and the in-suite should still be scheduled. But given the current environment, if a resident says, I don't want you in my suite because of COVID, or I'm symptomatic or something like that, then your inspector should make a note of that. But here's the catch now. As the property manager, you have to review that log, and at the earliest opportunity, you have to get back into those suites where access wasn't granted. You're still on the hook for that inspection. So one way or the other, virtually, in person, or delayed, those inspections have to happen. COVID as an excuse will only go so far. And by the way, fire doesn't think about COVID.
Somebody asked a question about fire masks that provide safe breathing for exiting. And the question was, should management make these items known, especially to high-risk residents? Anybody have any experience with those?
There's a lot of different things that are out there. They're not, the ones that I have seen are not ULC, or there's no real certification to them. And so you need to be moving on the first alarm. You need to not wonder if it's true, if it's real, is it a test? You need to be moving. If you don't move right immediately on the alarm, you're going to run out of time to get out of the building safely. I always hesitate to provide stuff to people that is a device or a system that they may not have the proper training, they may not have the ability to use it. If it's positive pressure or negative pressure, they may not have the ability to properly breathe wearing it. Anytime you put something, in between you and breathing, it's difficult.
Right?
Yeah, my concern would be that I can just see it now that somebody logs on to Amazon and they find this reasonably priced, this $29.95 mask, and now they step into a smoke-filled environment expecting that this is going to save their life. Again, as you said, Carrie, they're not trained. The equipment is not certified. It's being used for the wrong purpose. I think that owners should stay right away from that, and certainly managers should not be recommending those things.
Jeff, anything to add?
I agree with Murray. It's there's just too many risks involved and not adequate training, and if it's not being used on a regular basis, people forget and so on. So I can't see any manager wanting to take that liability.
Michelle, any comments?
Yeah, absolutely. I think it's a great question. We get questions like these types of things over our website all the time. I like to see managers be sure that they're in compliance with the fire code, but I also want to help them protect their liability when they're giving too much information that they're not professionals on. People don't recognize the fact that in a fire event, you might see a little bit of smoke and think, hey, I've got this great mask, I can go out there, but the heat might be what kills you. So we don't want people having a false sense of security. We want to protect the insurance and liability of all of the directors and the condominium itself. It's a great idea to say, we want to remind you about fire safety during COVID. You might want to check your local website with the fire department or practice your plan, that type of general information. You're directing them to something professional, but giving them specific advice, either A, could provide complacency where I don't have to leave yet because I've got this great new mask that's going to save my life if the building fills with smoke, or B, that they walk into a situation early without realizing that when they open that next door, there could be fire behind it. And we really want to be careful that we don't give people an opportunity to make improper decisions, and that we're certainly not part of that decision process. Everybody should do what's reasonable for them to keep themselves safe in their type of unit, in their type of building, with the best information that they have.
Yeah, and I think that goes back to Carrie's bonus tip, right? Get out. That's the tip, get out.
Just get out.
And there was a question in here, and this is going to be our last question that we'll be able to take, but the question was, we're over 7 stories, do we stay in the suite for safety? And Carrie, what are the 2 words you're going to say?
It's always safer to be on the outside, but if the fire's in your suite, get out of your suite and into another one. Get as many walls and doors between you and the fire as you can. If you have to shelter in the stairwell, do so, but the safest place is always outside.
So at the end of the day, just get out.
Get out.
Great. Well, I would love to be able to spend more time talking to our panel and answering the questions that we had in the chat box. Unfortunately, we are approaching 1:30, which is when our webinars end for our lunchtime webinars. So we're going to have to perhaps do another webinar on fire safety at a later date. There's a lot of great information, and thank you to all of our speakers for the great tips that you provided us today. As I said at the beginning, this webinar is being recorded and it will be available on our website next week. So if you need to review it again, just click onto our website and watch it, share it with people. And I want to share another big thank you, and that's with our sponsors. So thanks again to our sponsors, Integrity Property Management, Bayshore Property Management, FCS Fire Consulting Services, and Macintosh Perry. Once again, without your support, we're not able to offer these webinars free of charge. So from all of us at CCI Huronia and from all of those that are watching today or in the future, thank you to our sponsors for your continued support. Before we get going, I just want to let you know about some upcoming events. CCI Huronia's next webinar, Lunch and Learn webinar, will be on May 14th from 12 to 1:30. The topic has yet to be determined. We are looking for suggestions from you as to what you would like that topic to be. We will not be doing a webinar, Lunch and Learn webinar in April, because we have our 2-day intensive director's course, April 24th and 25th. So if you're interested in registering for this course, there is still room available. You can go to our website. The agenda is now posted on our website, and we are offering a special virtual price for this year's director's course because we will be doing it over Zoom. And so our price is $100 for CCI members, $300 for non-members. Details can be found at the ccihuronia.com website. Also, some of our other chapters are having some events that I want to let you know about. CCI National is hosting a webinar on April 14th at 4 p.m. Eastern Standard Time, and we're going to be talking about financial statements, translating the numbers. May 29th is the CCI National Conference. Our theme is Mind the Gap, and we have a keynote speaker who's going to talk about artificial intelligence in your condo. So if you're interested in either the national webinar or the conference, you can go to cci.ca and register there. Our sister chapter, Golden Horseshoe, on April 20th is doing a condo talk, COVID, the reopening blues. You can go to cci-ghc.ca for information. Grand River chapter on April 27th is hosting their level 200 director's course, Changes to Common Elements and Services. You can go to cci-grc.ca to register. London chapter on March 30th is doing a webinar on the expansion of CAT, Stages of Action. You can go to cci-sw.on.ca. And CCI Eastern Ontario is doing speed dating condo style on April 28th. You can go to cci-easternontario.ca. And CCI Toronto, if you want to see Murray again, April 27th, they're going to be talking about reserve funds, energy costs and emergency planning, climate change in condos. You can go to ccitoronto.org, their website, to register there. And also, I forgot to mention, CCI Huronia on June 8th is going to be doing an evening webinar from 7 to 9 p.m. called Wine and Wisdom. So that'll be an interesting one that you're not going to want to miss. More details about that will be on our website shortly. So until next time, I'm Sonia Hodis from the entire CCI family to yours, wishing you a good weekend. Please be safe, get out, and we hope to see you at our director's course on April 24th and 25th, and on our next Lunch and Learn webinar on May 14th. Don't forget that CCI is your condo connection.